$50,000. Gone. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the bank statement. I always request paper statements. I spent 40 years as a civil engineer, building roads and commercial foundations. I like things I can hold in my hands. I like ink on paper. Paper does not lie. Paper does not try to tell you that you are losing your mind. I ran my finger across the line item again. A wire transfer. $50,000 pulled out of my savings account on a Tuesday afternoon. I am 72 years old. Since my wife Martha passed away 3 years ago, my expenses are simple. Property taxes, groceries, gas for my old Ford truck, and maybe some hardware store supplies. I have not moved that kind of money in a decade. But there it was. Gone. I drove down to the local bank branch. I walked up to the counter and asked the teller to pull the wire authorization. I kept my voice calm. I did not want them thinking an old man was having a panic attack. The teller turned her screen toward me. She showed me the digital scan of the paperwork. There was a signature at the bottom. It looked exactly like mine. The loop on the A, the sharp slant on the V. It was a perfect copy, but my hand never held the pen that signed that paper. I thanked the teller. I walked out into the cold afternoon air, got into my truck, and sat behind the wheel. I did not start the engine. I just sat there, feeling a slow, heavy chill spread through my chest. Someone was stealing from me. Someone who had my personal details. Someone who could forge my name perfectly. And someone who was counting on me being too old and too confused to notice. I knew exactly who it was. I thought about my only daughter, Jessica. She is 38 years old. She lives in a world I do not understand. A world of leased luxury cars, expensive designer coats, and a husband named Marcus who calls himself a wealth manager, but always seems to be on the verge of bankruptcy. Then I thought about what happened just 4 days ago. Jessica had come over to my house. She brought a plastic container of hot soup. She acted like it was a grand gesture of care. She kept using that soft, patronizing voice people use when they talk to toddlers or sick dogs. I had taken my reading glasses off to rub my eyes. I placed them right next to the coffee maker on the kitchen island. I turned my back for 5 seconds to grab a mug from the cabinet. When I turned around, the glasses were gone. I asked Jessica if she had seen them. She sighed. It was a heavy, dramatic sigh. She looked at me with this terrible, practiced pity in her eyes. She said, "Dad, we need to talk about your memory. You are leaving things everywhere. You left the stove burner on last week, remember?" I did not leave the burner on last week, but she insisted I did. Just like she insisted I never put my glasses on the counter. I stood there in my own kitchen, feeling a strange sense of helplessness. When someone you raised looks you in the eye and tells you your brain is failing, a small part of you starts to believe it. You start to doubt your own reality. Then my grandson walked into the room. Leo is 16. Jessica and Marcus are his parents, but he is nothing like them. He is a quiet kid. He always wears thick headphones, keeping the noise of his parents' arguments out of his head. He walked past the kitchen island to get to the refrigerator. As he walked by, he casually bumped a stack of mail and magazines that Jessica had brought in. The pile shifted. My reading glasses were sitting right underneath a glossy catalog. Jessica had slipped the catalog over my glasses while my back was turned. Leo did not say a word. He grabbed a soda, looked at the glasses, then looked at me. His eyes were completely flat. He knew what his mother was doing. He knew she was trying to make me feel crazy. He gave me a tiny, almost invisible nod, and walked out the back door. That was 4 days ago. I thought it was just cruelty. I thought Jessica was just tired of dealing with an aging father and wanted to prove a point. Now, sitting in my truck outside the bank, the pieces snapped together. The forged signature, the missing $50,000, the constant lies about my memory. She was not just being cruel. She was building a case. She was laying the groundwork to prove that Arthur Vance was no longer fit to manage his own affairs. She was stealing my money. And she was making sure that if I ever complained, nobody would believe me. They would just think I was a confused old man who forgot what he spent his money on. The betrayal hit me so hard I could feel it in my teeth, my own flesh and blood. The little girl I taught to ride a bike in the driveway of the house I built with my own hands. She was treating me like an animal ready to be picked clean. I could have called the police right then. I could have marched into the precinct, slammed the bank statement on the desk, and demanded they arrest my daughter for fraud. But I spent my life building structures meant to last. I know that if you strike too early, before you know exactly where the weight is distributed, the whole thing collapses in a mess. If I called the cops now, it would be my word against hers. She would cry. She would tell the police her poor father was confused. Marcus would hire a slick lawyer. They might even use the police report as proof that I was paranoid and needed a legal guardian. I started the truck. I drove back to my empty house. I walked into the hallway. There is a picture of Martha on the wall. We were standing by a lake in Montana, smiling, holding a string of trout. I looked at her face for a long time. I promised her before she died that I would always take care of our family, but taking care of a disease sometimes means cutting it out. I walked into the kitchen and picked up the phone. I dialed Jessica's number. It rang 3 times before she answered. Her voice was sharp, annoyed that I was calling. I made my voice tremble just a little. I sounded tired. I sounded exactly like the broken old man she wanted me to be. I told her I missed her and Marcus. I told her I was going to make a pot roast tomorrow night, and I would really love it if they came over for dinner. Just a quiet family meal. She hesitated, probably calculating what she could get out of it. Then she agreed. She said they would be there by 6. I hung up the phone. I stood in the quiet kitchen. Tomorrow night, I am going to serve them a good meal. I am going to give my daughter one final chance to look me in the eye and tell me the truth about the money. I will leave the door open for her to be a human being. But if she lies to me, if she sits at my table, eats my food, and treats me like a fool, then she is no longer my daughter. She becomes a problem, and I have never left a problem standing. I spent the afternoon preparing a pot roast. It was Martha's recipe. Chuck roast, carrots, yellow onions, beef broth, and a heavy cast-iron Dutch oven. Cooking is like pouring concrete. You follow the steps. You do not rush the process. You give it time to set. While the meat simmered, I sat at the kitchen table and looked out the window at the bare oak trees in the yard. I built this house 40 years ago. I framed the walls. I laid the hardwood floors. This house was meant to be a safe place for my family, for Martha, and for our daughter. I spent a lot of time thinking about Jessica while the afternoon light faded. You raise a child, and you want to believe the best about them. You want to believe you put good iron in their spine. I remembered carrying her on my shoulders at the county fair in 1990. I remembered writing the checks for her college tuition, bleeding my savings dry so she would not start her adult life with a heavy debt. I remembered giving her away at her wedding, handing her over to a man I never fully trusted because she looked happy. A father's job is to protect, even when the kid makes a mistake, even when the mistake is $50,000. I wanted to believe there was a reason. Maybe Marcus got into trouble with bad people. He was always chasing quick money. He called himself a venture capitalist, but I knew what he really was. He was a guy who wore a $1,000 suit to hide the fact that his hands had never done a hard day of work in his life. Maybe his debts had finally caught up with him, and Jessica panicked. Maybe she took the money to save her family and was just too ashamed to tell me. If that was true, I could forgive her. I would write the loss off as a bad tax year. I would help them fix the mess. I just needed her to look me in the eye and be my daughter again. I just needed the truth. At 6 o'clock exactly, a heavy set of tires crunched on my gravel driveway. I looked out the front window. It was Marcus's black German luxury car. He leased it, of course. He liked the appearance of wealth a lot more than actual ownership. I opened the front door. Jessica walked up the steps first. She was wearing a beige cashmere coat. She smelled like expensive perfume and cold wind. Marcus was right behind her, checking something on his phone, not even looking at me when he crossed the threshold. Leo was not with them. Jessica said he was at a friend's house studying. I knew that was a lie. Leo just did not want to be around them. The boy spent half his life trying to become invisible. We sat down in the dining room. I served the roast. We ate in silence for a few minutes. The only sound was the clinking of silverware against porcelain. Marcus chewed his food fast, his eyes darting around my house like he was taking an inventory of the furniture. Jessica kept watching me. She watched how I held my fork. She watched how I poured my water. She was studying me, looking for signs of weakness, looking for a tremor in my hand or a vacant look in my eye. I kept my face blank. I gave her nothing. When the plates were half empty, I put my fork down. I wiped my mouth with a paper napkin. I looked right at her. I said I had been going over my finances lately. I said the market had been good to me, and my pension was more than I needed. I kept my voice soft and level. I said I knew the economy was tough on younger folks right now. I said, if anyone in this family is in a bad spot, if there is a debt, or a mistake, or a hole that needs filling, you can tell me. I looked from Jessica to Marcus. I said, I will not judge. I will not get angry. We are blood. We fix things together. All you have to do is tell me the truth, and I will write a check to make it go away. I left the door wide open for her. All she had to do was walk through it. Say she was sorry. Say she took the $50,000 because she was scared. I would have hugged her. I would have told her we would figure it out. That is what a father does. He absorbs the damage so his kids can walk straight. But Jessica did not walk through the door. She slammed it shut. She did not cry. She did not break down. Her face tightened. Her eyes turned hard and cold, like wet stones. She set her fork down loudly against the plate. She looked at Marcus, rolling her eyes, before looking back at me. She said, "Dad, what are you talking about? Are you imagining things again?" I felt a slow, heavy ache start in my chest. I said I was not imagining anything. I said I knew things had been difficult for Marcus's business. Marcus dropped his knife. It clattered against the table. He let out a sharp, arrogant laugh. He said his business was scaling perfectly. He said I was stuck in the 1980s, hiding cash under the mattress. He said I had no idea how leverage worked. He said I was sitting on a house worth nearly $1 million, doing nothing with the equity, while my brain slowly turned to mush. He actually said that. While eating the food I cooked, at the table I built with my own hands. I did not look at him. I kept my eyes on my daughter. I asked her, "Is that what you think, Jessica? You think my brain is turning to mush?" She reached across the table and tried to put her hand over mine. I pulled my hand back. She sighed. That same heavy, dramatic sigh from 4 days ago. She said, "Dad, please do not get aggressive. It is part of the condition. You are getting paranoid. You think people are in trouble. You think things are missing. It is classic dementia behavior. We read all about it online." I sat perfectly still. My breathing was slow and steady. Inside, the man who loved her was taking his last breaths. She reached into her expensive leather bag. She pulled out a small, black rubber band with a thick plastic square in the middle. It looked like a cheap digital watch, but there was no screen. She pushed it across the table toward me. She said her doctor recommended it. She said it was a tracking device, for my safety. She said I had been wandering around the neighborhood too much, and she needed to know where I was at all times in case I forgot my own name and walked into traffic. She wanted to tag me. Like a stray dog, like a piece of warehouse inventory. She said, "Just put it on, Dad. Let us take care of you. We will handle the bills from now on. You do not need to worry about money anymore. You just need to rest." I looked at the black rubber strap. Then I looked at the woman sitting across from me. I saw exactly who she was. The $50,000 was not a mistake. It was not a desperate move to pay off a bad loan. It was a test run. She was testing the waters to see if I would notice the missing cash. And when I brought up money tonight, her first instinct was to convince me I was crazy. She did not want my help. She wanted my surrender. She wanted me to hand over the keys to my life so she could sell it off for parts. I stood up. I did not yell. I did not throw the plate against the wall. I just stood up, picked up my plate, and carried it to the kitchen sink. I turned my back to them. I ran the tap water over the leftover meat. I said, "Dinner is over. You both need to leave." Marcus muttered something under his breath about me being ungrateful and impossible to deal with. I heard chairs scrape against the wood floor. I heard heavy footsteps walking down the hallway. Jessica stopped at the front door. She called out toward the kitchen. She said, "We will be back tomorrow with some legal paperwork, Dad. You cannot live like this anymore. We are taking control for your own good." The front door closed. The heavy latch clicked into place. I stood at the sink for a long time. The house was completely silent. There is a specific kind of pain when a stranger robs you. It is anger. It is a violation. You want to find them and hurt them. But when your own child robs you, and then looks you in the eye and tries to strip away your sanity, it is not anger. It is an amputation. You feel a part of yourself being cut off without anesthesia. I dried my hands on a dish towel. I walked into the dining room. I picked up the black tracker she left on the table. I dropped it into the trash can under the sink. I spent the next few hours cleaning the kitchen. I washed the cast iron pot. I wiped down the counters. I swept the floor. Manual labor keeps the mind focused. It stops you from breaking things. By midnight, the house was dark. I was sitting in my worn leather armchair in the living room. Only a single reading lamp was on. I was trying to figure out my next move. I knew I needed hard evidence. I knew I needed to look into Marcus's business. But I was just a retired engineer. I was out of my depth in the modern digital banking world. Then, my phone rang. It was my old flip phone sitting on the side table. It vibrated against the wood, loud in the quiet house. I looked at the small screen. It was late. Nobody calls an old man at midnight unless someone has died. The caller ID showed a name I had not seen on my screen in a long time. Sarah Jenkins. Sarah used to be the head accountant at my construction firm years ago. We worked together for a decade. I trusted her with every penny my company made. She was sharp, loyal, and did not take nonsense from anyone. When I retired and closed the firm, she moved on to a big regional bank. She eventually became the manager of the local branch. The same branch where I kept my life savings. I flipped the phone open. I brought it to my ear. I said, "Hello, Sarah." I expected a standard greeting. I expected small talk. Instead, her voice came through the small speaker, low, tight, and completely professional. The kind of voice you use when you are looking over your shoulder. She said, "Arthur, do not hang up. I am breaking a dozen federal banking regulations just by making this call from my personal phone. I sat up straight in my chair. I said, "What is going on, Sarah?" She took a slow breath. I could hear the hum of a car engine in the background. She was driving. She said, "I saw the wire transfer cross my desk today. The 50,000. I pulled the file because it flagged on our internal system. Arthur, the signature on the paper authorization form is a perfect match, but the digital timestamp on the terminal approval makes no sense. And it is not just the 50,000. My grip tightened on the plastic phone. The leather of my chair creaked in the silence of the living room. I asked her, "What do you mean it is not just the 50,000? Sarah lowered her voice even more. She said, "I have been digging through the digital logs for the past 3 hours. Arthur, whoever is doing this is preparing to drain everything. And I mean everything. You need to meet me tomorrow morning. Do not tell your daughter. Do not tell your son-in-law. Do not tell anyone. Just meet me at the diner on Route 9 at 7. The situation is much, much worse than you think." Route 9 is a long stretch of black asphalt that cuts through the Pine Barrens just outside of town. It is mostly industrial parks, lumber yards, and cheap motels. Right in the middle of it all is a diner that has not changed its menu or its vinyl booths since 1985. It is the kind of place where third-shift truck drivers drink black coffee and nobody asks any questions. I pulled my truck into the gravel parking lot at exactly 7 in the morning. The sky was the color of dirty concrete. A cold wind was blowing off the highway, rattling the loose metal sign above the diner entrance. I walked inside. It smelled like old grease, bleach, and burnt toast. The place was mostly empty. I saw Sarah sitting in the back corner booth. She was wearing a dark blue suit. Her hair was pulled back tight. She had a thick manila envelope sitting on the table in front of her, and her hands were wrapped tightly around a white ceramic coffee mug. I walked over and slid into the booth across from her. Sarah looked at me. She looked tired. There were dark circles under her eyes. She is 45 years old, a branch manager for one of the biggest banks in the state. She makes a good living by following the rules. Sitting here with me, carrying internal bank documents out of the office, was putting her entire career on the line. I asked her why she was taking this risk. She took a sip of her coffee. She said, "Arthur, 20 years ago I was a 22-year-old single mother working the reception desk at your construction firm. You paid for my night classes. You gave me my first promotion in the accounting department. You treated me like a human being when the rest of the world treated me like a statistic. I owe you my career. I am not going to sit behind a desk and watch someone ruin you." I nodded. That is the thing about the old days. Loyalty actually meant something. You built a foundation with people, and it held weight. I looked at the thick envelope on the table. I told her to show me. Sarah opened the metal clasp. She pulled out a stack of paper. It was bank logs, raw data, columns of numbers, timestamps, routing codes, and IP addresses. To a normal person, it would look like a foreign language. But I spent 40 years reading blueprints and structural load charts. I know how to read a system. She slid the first page toward me. She pointed her pen at a line near the middle of the page. She said, "This is the wire transfer from Tuesday. $50,000. It was initiated online, through the banking portal. It bypassed the standard phone verification because it was done from a recognized device." I asked her what a recognized device meant. She pointed to another column of numbers. She said, "This is the IP address, the digital fingerprint of the computer that ordered the transfer." I ran a trace on it. "Arthur, this IP address belongs to the internet router in your own house. Whoever stole this money was sitting in your study, using your desktop computer." I stared at the numbers. The diner suddenly felt very cold. I told Sarah I do not use online banking. I have never even set up a login. She nodded. She said, "I know. But someone set one up in your name 3 weeks ago. They answered all your security questions. They knew your mother's maiden name. They knew the make and model of your first car. They knew your social security number." I closed my eyes for a second. The picture was coming into focus. It was ugly and it was entirely clear. Sarah slid a second piece of paper over the first one. She said the money did not just vanish. It went to a routing number in the Cayman Islands. But the account is not anonymous. It belongs to a corporate entity called Apex Consulting LLC. It is a shell company registered in Delaware. I did not need to ask. I already knew the answer. But I let her say it anyway. I asked her who owns Apex Consulting. Sarah looked me dead in the eye. She said, "Marcus Cole, your son-in-law." I leaned back against the vinyl booth. I listened to the low hum of the diner's refrigerator. I watched a waitress wipe down the counter on the other side of the room. I felt nothing at first. Just a strange, hollow silence in my chest. Then the memory hit me. It was last Tuesday, early afternoon. Jessica and Marcus had stopped by for a surprise visit. Jessica had brought a box of old photographs. She said she wanted to go through them with me. She kept me in the living room for over an hour, asking me questions about my childhood, asking me if I could still remember the names of my old aunts and uncles. She was testing my memory, testing to see how far gone I was. While she had me trapped on the sofa, Marcus had excused himself. He said he needed to make a business call. He said my cell reception was bad, and asked if he could sit in my study where it was quiet. I said yes. I let him into my study. I let him sit at my desk. I sat in the diner booth, putting the pieces together. Marcus was not making a phone call. He was sitting at my computer. He was setting up the wire transfer. He was draining $50,000 from my life savings. And his wife, my own flesh and blood, was sitting 10 feet away, keeping the old man distracted with family photo albums. They ran a con on me. A cheap, dirty two-person hustle in my own living room. I looked at Sarah. I said, "So Marcus is the thief." Sarah shook her head slowly. She looked down at her coffee mug. She said, "Arthur, Marcus is the one moving the money. He is the mechanic. But he is not the one running the job." She pulled a third piece of paper from the envelope. This one was not a bank log. It was a printed copy of an email. She said, 3 days ago, Jessica came into the main branch downtown. She did not ask for me. She asked for one of the junior loan officers. The kid was smart enough to flag the inquiry and send me an email about it. I looked at the email printout. I asked, what did she want? Sarah swallowed hard. She said, she was asking about your house, Arthur. She wanted to know the maximum equity line of credit she could pull out of the property. She asked the loan officer what the procedure was for a reverse mortgage. The words hit me like a hammer swinging straight into my ribs. My house. I bought that plot of land when I was 25 years old. I cleared the brush with a chainsaw. I dug the foundation by hand. I laid the rebar and poured the concrete. I framed every wall. I sanded the oak floors on my hands and knees until my knuckles bled. Martha picked out the yellow paint for the kitchen. We raised our daughter inside those walls. Every scratch on the doorframe, every creak in the floorboards, it was the history of my family. It was the only thing I had left of my wife. And Jessica was treating it like an ATM machine. I asked Sarah, can she do that? Can she take out a loan on my house without my signature? Sarah said, not right now. She asked the loan officer if a power of attorney would be enough to authorize the mortgage. The officer told her it would have to be a specific, durable power of attorney. But Arthur, if she is already forging your signature on wire transfers, forging a power of attorney is just another piece of paper to her. Sarah reached across the table and touched my arm. Her hand was shaking a little. She said, Arthur, they are not just stealing cash. They are trying to take the ground out from under your feet. They are going to leverage your house, take the money, and let the bank foreclose on you. You will lose everything. You need to take these papers to the police right now. You need to press charges. I looked at the stack of papers, the digital fingerprints of my daughter's betrayal. If I went to the police with this, they would call Marcus in for questioning. Marcus would panic. He would hire a lawyer. Jessica would play the victim. They would say I gave them permission. They would say I was confused. The police might freeze the account, but $50,000 is not enough to get the FBI involved. It is a state-level white-collar crime. Marcus might get probation. Jessica would probably walk away clean. And then what? I would be an old man living alone in a house, looking over my shoulder, waiting for them to try again. Waiting for them to forge a medical document, waiting for them to lock me away. I looked up at Sarah. I said, no police. Sarah looked shocked. She said, Arthur, you cannot let them get away with this. They are going to ruin you. I gathered the papers. I tapped the edges on the table to make a neat stack. I slid them back into the manila envelope. I said, they are not going to ruin me, Sarah, because they made a mistake. They think I am a confused old man. They think I am weak. I slid the metal clasp on the envelope shut. I looked at her and said, I am an engineer. When I find a crack in a foundation, I do not just patch it with cheap cement. I dig down to the bedrock. I expose the rot. And then I tear the whole thing down. I thanked Sarah for her courage. I promised her she would not get in trouble for giving me the documents. I paid for her coffee, left a $5 bill for the waitress, and walked out of the diner. The wind had picked up. It was biting cold. I walked across the gravel lot to my truck. I climbed inside and shut the heavy metal door. It was quiet in the cab. I put the key in the ignition, but I did not turn it. I sat there and let the reality of it wash over me. I let the pain hit the bottom of my stomach. My daughter, my little girl, she was actively plotting to destroy my life. She wanted my money, she wanted my house, and she wanted me out of the way. There was a time when I would have tried to save her. I would have staged an intervention. I would have paid off Marcus's debts just to keep the peace. But sitting in the cold truck, staring at the gray highway, I realized something. You cannot save someone who is actively trying to cut your throat. The sadness started to fade. It drained out of me slow and steady, leaving an empty space behind. And into that empty space came something else. Something cold. Something precise. Something that felt like heavy, dark steel. I turned the key. The engine roared to life. I put the truck in gear and drove home. The drive took 20 minutes. I did not turn on the radio. I just listened to the hum of the tires on the asphalt. When I pulled into my driveway, I looked at my house. I did not see a home anymore. I saw a battlefield. I saw a structure that needed to be defended. I unlocked the front door and walked inside. The air was still. I walked straight down the hallway past the kitchen and into my study. My desktop computer was sitting on the wooden desk. The screen was black. A little green light blinked on the tower. I walked over to it. I looked at the keyboard. I knew Marcus had touched those keys. I knew he had sat in my chair and stolen my money while I was in the next room. My first instinct was to pull the cables out of the wall, to smash the monitor onto the floor, to call the bank and freeze everything, to change every password and lock down every account. But I stopped. I put my hands in my pockets. If I changed the password, Marcus would know I found out. He would stop stealing. He would cover his tracks. The game would end in a stalemate. If you want to catch a rat, you do not clean up the bait. You leave the cheese exactly where it is. You just build a better trap around it. I stepped away from the desk. I did not touch the mouse. I did not change the password. I left the computer exactly the way Marcus had left it. I was going to let him come back. I was going to let him log in again. I was going to let them steal as much as they wanted, until the weight of their own greed broke their necks. I walked out of the study and went to the hall closet. I reached up to the top shelf and pulled down a heavy green canvas bag. It was my old gun cleaning kit. I carried it to the living room table. Then I went to the gun safe in the corner of the room. I worked the combination lock. The heavy steel door clicked open. I reached inside and pulled out my old Remington 12-gauge pump-action shotgun. It had been years since I fired it. I carried it over to the table and sat down. I opened the canvas bag. I took out the brass brushes, the cotton patches, and the small bottle of Hop's No. 9 solvent. The smell of the oil filled the room, sharp and metallic. I broke the gun down. I pulled the barrel off the receiver. I ran the brass brush down the steel tube. I scrubbed away years of dust and carbon. I wiped down the action until the metal was bright and clean. I oiled the sliding parts until the pump moved back and forth with a smooth, deadly click. I sat alone in my empty house, wiping down the polished wood stock with an oiled rag. I was not a confused old man anymore. I was not a victim. They thought I was sliding into the dark. They thought I was blind. But they forgot one thing. I built everything they were standing on. And I know exactly how to pull the supports out from under them. I know how to take a building apart. You do not just swing a sledgehammer at the walls. You look for the load-bearing beams. You look for the foundation lines. You find the weak points where the concrete meets the steel. Once you understand how a structure stands up, you know exactly how to make it fall down. I applied the same logic to my daughter. I knew Jessica and Marcus had a routine. Every Thursday morning, they dropped Leo off at his high school at 7:30. Then Marcus drove to his rented office space downtown to pretend he was a big-shot venture capitalist. Jessica usually went to a hot yoga class at 9, followed by brunch with her friends. She never got back to their house before 1 in the afternoon. That gave me a 4-hour window. Their house is in a gated subdivision on the north side of town. It is one of those cookie-cutter neighborhoods where every house looks like a small hotel. Stucco walls, massive front doors, 3-car garages. It looks expensive, but an engineer can tell when a house is built cheap. The frames go up too fast. The materials are mostly plastic and composite. It is all a facade, just like the people living inside. The front gate of the neighborhood requires a security code. But a gate is only as secure as the dumbest person who uses it. I parked my old Ford truck down the street and waited. At 8:45, a blue delivery van pulled up to the keypad. The driver punched in a code. The iron gate swung open, and the van rolled through. I put my truck in gear and slipped in right behind him before the gates could close. I drove past the manicured lawns and parked a block away from Jessica's house. I walked the rest of the way. I wore my old canvas work jacket and a plain baseball cap. I carried a small canvas tool bag. If any of the neighbors looked out their windows, they would just see an old handyman showing up to fix a leaky pipe. They would not pay any attention to me. People in these neighborhoods never look at the working class. I walked up their wide concrete driveway. I went straight to the side door that leads into the garage. Jessica thought I was losing my mind, but she forgot one important detail. 6 years ago, when they bought this house, she complained that the side door was sticking. I came over with my tools. I planed the wood, hung a new solid steel door, and installed the deadbolt myself. When you install a lock, it is common practice to keep a spare key to make sure the pins align perfectly. I never gave that spare key back. I just threw it in a coffee can in my garage and forgot about it. Until this morning. I pulled the brass key from my pocket. I slid it into the deadbolt. It turned with a heavy, satisfying click. I stepped into the garage and closed the door behind me. It was quiet. The air smelled like expensive car wax and damp cardboard. I walked up the 2 wooden steps and opened the door into the main house. I stood in their kitchen. It was massive. White marble countertops, stainless steel appliances that looked like they had never been used to cook a hot meal. The house was dead silent. Only the low hum of the massive refrigerator running in the corner. I was not there to vandalize the place. I was not there to steal their electronics. I was there for Martha. When my wife died, she left behind a wooden jewelry box. It was not filled with diamonds or gold bars. It had her silver wedding band, a pearl necklace my father gave her, and a few turquoise pieces we bought on a road trip through New Mexico in 1978. The monetary value was barely a few $1,000s. The emotional value was my entire world. Last month, I noticed the wooden box was missing from my bedroom dresser. When I asked Jessica about it, she gave me that same pitying look and told me I must have misplaced it. She said I probably hid it to keep it safe and just forgot where I put it. I knew she took it. I knew she pawned the silver and sold the pearls to pay off one of Marcus's credit cards. But a small, desperate part of me hoped I was wrong. I hoped I would find the box sitting on her dresser, maybe just borrowed for a special occasion. I walked up the carpeted stairs. I went into the master bedroom. It looked like a page out of a furniture catalog. Everything was gray and white and perfectly sterile. I opened Jessica's closet. Row after row of designer shoes, silk blouses, leather handbags with gold logos. Tens of thousands of dollars of debt hanging on velvet hangers. I checked the top shelves. I checked the drawers under the massive bed. I checked the master bathroom cabinets. No wooden box. No silver ring. No pearls. She had sold her own mother's memories. I stood in the middle of the bedroom. The coldness I felt in my truck the day before came back, wrapping around my ribs like a sheet of ice. Any lingering hesitation I had about destroying them evaporated in that sterile, gray room. I walked out of the bedroom and headed down the hall to the home office. The office belonged to Marcus. It had a massive glass desk, a leather executive chair, and framed posters of motivational quotes about success and hustle. It was the office of a man playing a game. On the glass desk sat a sleek, silver laptop. It was open. The screen was black asleep. I pulled a pair of thin latex gloves from my canvas tool bag and pulled them on. I reached out and tapped the trackpad. The screen glowed to life. I expected to see a password prompt. I expected a lock screen. But Marcus and Jessica lived in a gated community. They thought they were untouchable. They were arrogant, and arrogance breeds laziness. The screen opened directly to Jessica's desktop. I sat down in the leather executive chair. I leaned closer to the monitor. The desktop was cluttered with icons, mostly shopping receipts, yoga schedules, and unpaid bills. But right in the center of the screen, sitting by itself, was a yellow folder icon. The name of the folder was typed out in plain black text. It said, Dad Financial and Medical. I rested my gloved hand on the trackpad. My pulse was steady. I double-clicked the folder. A window popped up. There were about 10 files inside. Some were PDFs of my bank statements, the ones they had been draining. There was a scanned copy of my birth certificate. There was a copy of the deed to my house. Then I saw a Microsoft Word document. The title was Vance Conservatorship Draft. I double-clicked the document. The word processor opened. I stared at the bright white screen. It was a legal petition addressed to the state probate court. It was drawn up by a cheap, aggressive local lawyer. I read the opening paragraph. It stated that Arthur Thomas Vance, age 72, was suffering from severe, progressive cognitive decline. It stated that he was incapable of managing his personal finances, unable to provide for his own daily care, and posed a significant danger to himself. I scrawled down. My eyes scanned the cold, clinical legal jargon. The petition requested that Jessica Cole be granted full, emergency guardianship over my person and my estate. It asked the court to strip me of my right to sign contracts, my right to access my own bank accounts, my right to sell my own property, my right to choose my own medical care. They were not just trying to steal my money. They were trying to erase me. Legally, on paper, they were asking a judge to declare that I no longer existed as a free man. I would be a ward of the state, treated like an infant, completely under the control of the woman who stole her mother's wedding ring. I kept scrawling. There was a section titled Asset Liquidation Plan. It outlined exactly what they intended to do once the judge handed them the keys to my life. They were going to sell my house immediately. They already had a real estate agent lined up to buy it for cash at 20% below market value. A quick, dirty sale to put hundreds of thousands of dollars into an account controlled entirely by Jessica. I felt a tight knot form in my throat. I swallowed it down. I closed the document. I looked at the other files in the yellow folder. At the bottom of the list was a PDF file. The name of the file was Pinegrove Admission Forms. I clicked it. It was an application packet for an assisted living facility called Pinegrove Estate. The fields were already filled out in Jessica's neat, looping handwriting. She had listed my name, my date of birth, and my social security number. Under the medical history section, she had checked the boxes for dementia, violent outbursts, and a flight risk. She was checking those boxes so she could justify putting me in a locked ward. I minimized the application. I opened the internet browser. I typed the words Pinegrove Estate into the search bar. The official website came up first. It showed pictures of smiling nurses, bright sunshine, and happy old people playing cards in a clean room. It looked like a resort. But I did not click on the official website. I scrolled down to the local news articles and the state health department inspection reports. The truth is always buried on the second page of the search results. I clicked on an investigative report from a local newspaper, dated 8 months ago. The headline read, Pinegrove Estate Cited for Severe Neglect and Chemical Restraints. I read the article. My chest felt like it was trapped in a vise. Pinegrove was a for-profit facility located 2 hours out of town, in the middle of nowhere. It was a place designed for families who wanted to dump their problem relatives and forget about them. It was cheap. It was understaffed. The article detailed the horrors inside. The state inspectors found that patients in the memory care ward were routinely given heavy doses of antipsychotic sedatives just to keep them quiet. They called it chemical restraint. The patients spent their days sitting in soiled wheelchairs, staring at blank walls, unable to speak or feed themselves, because their brains were smothered by cheap tranquilizers. The inspectors noted a massive rate of unexplained bruising. They noted extreme weight loss among the residents. They noted that the doors to the memory ward were locked from the outside with heavy magnetic seals, and family visitation was highly restricted. If you went into Pinegrove Estate, you did not come out. You just faded away in a dark, foul-smelling room until your heart finally gave out. I sat back in the leather chair. The silence in the house was deafening. I looked at the bright computer screen. I pictured myself inside that facility. I pictured a rough, underpaid orderly shoving a paper cup full of heavy sedatives in my face. I pictured my arms going numb, my mind turning to heavy sludge, sitting in a dark corridor while my daughter used the money from my house to buy a new sports car. It was not just theft. It was a death sentence. A slow, terrifying tremor started in my hands. It was the biological reaction of a cornered animal. My brain was flooding my system with adrenaline, screaming at me to fight or run. I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath through my nose. I held it for 4 seconds. I exhaled slowly through my mouth. I did it again and again. I am an engineer. I do not panic. I analyze the structural load. I calculate the pressure points. I open my eyes. The tremor in my hands was gone. The fear was gone. What replaced it was a cold, absolute clarity. Jessica was my daughter. I rocked her to sleep when she had a fever. I taught her how to drive. I walked her down the aisle. But the woman who filled out that application form for Pinegrove Estate was not my daughter. My daughter was gone. The woman sitting in the driver's seat of this conspiracy was a predator. And you do not show mercy to a predator. You do not try to talk sense into a snake. You take a heavy shovel and you cut its head off. I moved the mouse. I closed the internet browser. I cleared the browser history. I closed the PDF application. I closed the Word document. I backed out of the yellow folder and left the desktop exactly the way I found it. I put the computer back to sleep. The screen went black. I stood up. I checked the glass desk to make sure I had not moved any of Marcus's pens or papers. I picked up my canvas tool bag. I walked out of the office, down the carpeted stairs, and through the massive kitchen. I exited through the garage, using my spare key to lock the deadbolt behind me. I walked down the block to my truck. I climbed in, took off the latex gloves, and stuffed them into my pocket. I started the engine and drove out of the gated community. I drove aimlessly for an hour. I needed to think. If I went to the local police now and told them about the files on the computer, it would still just be my word against hers. They could not get a warrant based on an old man claiming he saw a draft of a document on a computer. Marcus would just delete the folder the second the cops knocked on the door. He would run a digital shredder over the hard drive. All the evidence would vanish. Then Jessica would accelerate her plan. She would file the conservatorship petition the very next day, claiming my visit to the police was proof of my paranoid delusions. I needed a trap that they could not delete. I needed a trap that triggered automatically. with the force of a freight train. I needed to make sure that when the hammer fell, it did not just hit them with a fine or a slap on the wrist. I needed to make sure they lost their freedom. I wanted them locked in a cage, just like the one they were preparing for me. I pulled my truck over onto the shoulder of the highway. I put it in park. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my flip phone. I scrawled through my short list of contacts. I stopped on the name Tom Harrison. Tom and I have been fishing together for 30 years. We sit on a small aluminum boat on the lake, drink cheap whiskey, and complain about our knees. Tom is a good man. He is also a retired federal prosecutor. He spent his entire career putting organized crime bosses and white-collar thieves into federal penitentiaries. He knows the penal code the way I know the building code. He knows exactly where the legal tripwires are buried. If you want to build a cage that nobody can escape from, you do not hire a carpenter. You hire the devil's architect. I hit the green call button. The phone rang twice. Tom answered with his usual gravelly growl. He said, "Arthur, the fish are not biting today. What do you want?" I looked out the windshield at the gray sky. My voice was completely flat. I said, "Tom, I need you to tell me how to build a federal case. I need to know exactly how much money someone has to steal before the United States government locks them in a box and throws away the key." Tom went silent on the other end of the line. He has a predator's instinct. He knew immediately from the tone of my voice that this was not a hypothetical question. He did not ask me if I was okay. He did not ask me who I was talking about. He just said, "Come over to my cabin. Bring a bottle of the good stuff. We have a lot of work to do." I drove away from my daughter's house and headed back to my own. The sun was going down by the time I pulled into my driveway. I walked inside and did not turn on the lights. I walked straight to the living room and sat down in my old leather chair and stared at the empty wall. I kept seeing that application form in my head. Pennygrove Estate. I kept seeing the boxes she checked next to my name. Dementia, violent outbursts, flight risk. She was going to put me in a locked room. She was going to let strangers pump my veins full of cheap chemical sedatives until I forgot my own name. She was going to let me rot in a soiled bed, just so she could sell this house and buy more luxury garbage that she did not need. I sat there in the dark, realizing my own flesh and blood wanted to lock me in a chemical prison just to buy another sports car. Let me ask you something. If you caught your own child plotting to erase your existence, would you show mercy? Drop the word merci in the comments if you would forgive them. Or drop Pirison if you would burn their world to the ground. I know what my answer was. I took a deep breath. The air in the room felt heavy, but my mind was completely clear. I did not shed a tear. I did not yell. I stood up, went to the liquor cabinet, and grabbed an unopened bottle of 20-year-old bourbon. I picked up my heavy canvas coat, walked out the front door, and got back into my truck. I drove out toward Lake Miller. It is a 40-minute drive out of town, deep into the pine woods. The roads get narrow and the streetlights disappear. I was going to see Tom Harrison. Tom and I have been fishing together for 30 years. We sit on the water, drink cheap beer, and complain about our aching knees. But before Tom retired, he was not just a guy in a fishing boat. He was a federal prosecutor. He spent his entire career taking apart organized crime syndicates, corrupt politicians, and white-collar thieves. He put the worst people in the world into federal penitentiaries. He knows the penal code the way I know the structural limits of reinforced concrete. I pulled up to his log cabin. Smoke was rising from the stone chimney. I knocked on the heavy oak door. Tom opened it. He is a big man, built like a brick wall, with thick gray hair and a face full of hard lines. He looked at me, looked at the bottle of premium bourbon in my hand, and stepped aside to let me in. He did not ask any stupid questions. He could read the look on my face. We sat down at his heavy wooden dining table. The only sound was the crackle of the fire in the wood stove. I poured 2 heavy glasses of bourbon. We drank the first one in total silence. It burned all the way down. Then, I started talking. I told him everything. I told him about the missing $50,000. I told him about the forged signature. I told him about Sarah from the bank, the offshore shell company Marcus set up, and the fake dementia routine Jessica was running on me. Tom sat there, staring at his glass. His jaw muscle twitched. Then I told him about my visit to their house. I told him about the yellow folder on the computer. I told him about the legal petition to strip away my human rights, and the application to Pennygrove Estate. Tom put his glass down. He let out a long, slow breath. He stood up, walked over to his desk in the corner of the room, and opened a laptop. He told me to give him the name of the shell company. I told him it was Apex Consulting in Delaware. He typed it in. Then he asked for the name of the doctor listed on the Pennygrove application. I told him the name. Tom made a phone call. He called an old buddy who still worked as a forensic investigator for the state. Tom spoke in low, clipped sentences. He gave them the names and asked for a rapid background pull. We sat in silence for 20 minutes, waiting. The fire popped and hissed. Tom's phone buzzed. He read the text message. He looked up at me, and his eyes were as cold as the lake outside. He said, "Arthur, it is worse than you think. This is not just a plan on a computer. They are already executing it." I gripped the edge of the wooden table. I asked him what he meant. Tom leaned forward. He said, "Marcus is completely underwater. He owes massive debts to people you do not want to owe money to. Illegal sports books and offshore crypto margins. He needs $500,000 by the end of the year, or they are going to break his legs, and then they are going to take his house." I felt my stomach drop. Marcus was not just a greedy fool. He was a desperate animal in a trap. Tom kept talking. He said, "And Jessica knows everything. She is the one driving the bus. My guy just checked the financial records for that doctor at Pengrove. 2 weeks ago, Jessica wrote a personal check to him for $5,000. She disguised it as a medical consulting fee." I stared at Tom. I asked, "What was the fee for?" Tom said, "It was a bribe, Arthur. That doctor is dirty. He has been investigated twice for signing off on fraudulent medical evaluations. Jessica paid him to officially declare you mentally incompetent. The medical evaluation is already scheduled for the second week of next month. They are coming for you, Arthur. They are going to drug you, throw you in a van, and lock you in that chemical prison before the snow melts." The silence in the cabin was suffocating. My own daughter. She had looked me in the eye, brought me a bowl of hot soup, and smiled at me, knowing she had already paid a man $5,000 to end my life. I looked at Tom. I said, "I want to call the state police. I want them arrested tonight." Tom shook his head. He slammed his hand flat on the table. He said, "No, you do not call the local cops." I felt a flash of anger. I asked him why. I told him I had the bank logs. I had the proof of the wire transfer. Tom looked at me with the cold, hard eyes of a prosecutor. He said, "Because $50,000 is a state-level problem. You call the local police. Here is exactly what happens. They bring Marcus in for questioning. Marcus hires a defense attorney. Jessica sits in front of a local judge and turns on the tears. She says you are a confused old man, and they were just trying to protect your assets. The prosecutor drops the theft charge down to a misdemeanor. Marcus gets community service. Jessica gets probation." Tom poured another shot of bourbon. He did not drink it. He just stared at it. He said, "And then you have to go home and sleep with one eye open for the rest of your life, because they will try again, and next time they will not leave a paper trail." I sat back in my chair. The anger in my chest hardened into something sharp and heavy. I asked him, "So what do I do?" Tom leaned across the table. His voice dropped to a low, dangerous growl. He said, "You bring the federal government down on their heads." I listened as Tom laid out the brutal mathematics of the United States justice system. He explained that state prisons are overcrowded and state judges are lenient. But the federal system is a completely different machine. When the FBI gets involved, the conviction rate is 98%. And in the federal system, there is no parole. You get 10 years, you serve 85% of it hard time. They put you in a khaki uniform, they ship you to a camp halfway across the country, and they seize every asset you bought with stolen money. I asked him how we get the feds involved. Tom said, "Wire fraud. The money went from your local bank, across state lines to a shell company in Delaware, and then offshore. That makes it a federal issue. But the FBI does not get out of bed for $50,000. They are busy. To guarantee they pick up the case, to guarantee a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 to 20 years, you have to hit the magic number." I looked at him. I asked, "What is the number?" Tom said, $500,000. $500,000. That is the threshold for a major federal wire fraud investigation. The fire popped in the wood stove. The heat hit my face, but I felt freezing cold. I said, "You are telling me I have to let them steal my life savings?" Tom did not blink. He said, "I am telling you to bait the trap. You want to catch a monster. You have to let the pig get fat. You have to let them think they are winning. You have to let them cross the threshold. Once they hit 500,000, I make one phone call to my old desk at the federal building. We hand them the complete package. Bank logs, IP addresses, the fake medical bribes. We drop an anvil on their heads, and they never see the sun again." I looked down at my hands. They were the rough, calloused hands of a man who spent his life building things. Now, I was being asked to stand by and watch my own house be torn down to the studs. I had to play the fool. I had to let my daughter humiliate me. I had to let her steal the money I saved for 40 years. I looked up at Tom. I nodded. I said, "Tell me exactly what to do." I stayed at the cabin for 2 more hours. We drew up the blueprint. We mapped out every single step. When I finally walked out to my truck, the wind had died down. The stars were cold and bright over the black water of the lake. I drove home. I walked into my house. It was 2 in the morning. I went into my study. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and took out my bank security token. I picked up my phone and called the 24-hour automated banking service. I navigated the menus. I turned off the large transaction alerts. I disabled the secondary authentication checks. I took down the firewalls I had built to protect my money. I swung the vault door wide open. Then, I did the hardest thing I have ever done in my 72 years on this earth. I dialed Jessica's number. It went to voicemail. I waited for the beep. I made my voice shake. I made myself sound small and weak and terrified. I said, "Jessica, honey, it is Dad. I am so sorry about dinner tonight. You were right. My memory has been playing tricks on me lately. I get confused. I found my checkbook under the couch, just like you said. Please do not be mad at me. I need your help. I think I need you to start looking after my mail for me." I hung up the phone. I felt a wave of nausea hit my stomach. It physically made me sick to degrade myself like that, to give her the satisfaction of thinking she had broken my mind. But I thought about the concrete walls of a federal penitentiary. I thought about the heavy steel doors locking shut. The next morning, I sat at my desk and opened a secure laptop Tom had given me. It ran on an encrypted network. I logged into a shadow view of my bank account. At 10:15 in the morning, the screen refreshed. Another wire transfer had been initiated. This one was for $100,000. It was routed straight to Apex Consulting. Jessica had heard my voicemail. She knew the door was open. She and Marcus were rushing in to loot the place. I opened a small leather notebook on my desk. I took out a heavy black pen. I drew a single, thick line on the paper. 150,000 down, 350,000 to go. The countdown had started. The trap was set. And I was not going to blink until the jaws snapped shut. The winter dragged on. January bled into February. Every Tuesday, like clockwork, another chunk of my life savings vanished. $75,000. 40,000, 80,000. I watched it happen on the encrypted laptop Tom gave me. I sat alone in my dark study, watching my account balance drop like a stone thrown into a deep well. Jessica and Marcus stopped pretending to care. They stopped bringing me soup. They stopped asking about my health. They started coming over just to take things. They thought I was a ghost haunting my own house. They treated me like I was already dead. One afternoon, Marcus walked into my living room and stood in front of an antique grandfather clock. I bought that clock in 1982. Solid mahogany, brass weights. He did not ask if he could have it. He just pulled out his phone and called a guy with a van to come load it up. Jessica stood by the front door, scrolling through her phone. She did not even look at me. She just said, "Dad, the clock needs repairs. We are taking it to a specialist." I sat in my armchair. I stared at the floor. I let my mouth hang open a little. I played the confused old man. I just nodded slowly and watched them carry a piece of my history out the front door. It was exhausting. Acting weak takes more strength than acting tough. You have to swallow your pride every single minute of the day. You have to let people you despise treat you like dirt. But I was not just sitting in my chair. While they were looting my savings, I was moving heavy machinery behind their backs. Martha was a smart woman. Years ago, when we sold a piece of commercial real estate, she insisted we put the profit into an independent blind trust. She did not want it tied up with my construction business. She wanted a safety net. It was a separate legal entity. Jessica did not know it existed. Marcus definitely did not know. I met with Sarah at the bank on a cold Thursday morning. We sat in a back office with the blinds drawn. I authorized her to crack open the trust. I told her exactly what I wanted to do with the money. Tom had pulled the property records on Marcus and Jessica. They lived in a massive stucco house in a gated community, but they were drowning. Marcus had missed 3 mortgage payments. The bank was getting ready to start foreclosure proceedings. That mortgage was bad paper. The bank wanted it off their books before the quarter ended, and they were willing to sell it for pennies on the dollar to anyone willing to take on the risk. I bought the debt. I bought the mortgage note using the blind trust. I became their creditor. I owned the roof over their heads. If they missed one more payment, the trust could legally evict them, seize the property, and throw their expensive furniture onto the street. They thought they were stealing my house, but I had just bought theirs. I walked out of the bank with the deed in my jacket pocket. It was a single piece of paper, but it was heavier than a loaded gun. A week later, I was out in my garage. I was sharpening a steel chisel on the grinding wheel. The side door opened. It was my grandson Leo. He was wearing his heavy winter coat. His headphones were pulled down around his neck. He looked terrible. He looked like a kid who was watching a slow-motion car crash and did not know how to stop it. He walked over to my workbench. He did not say anything for a long time. The grinding wheel spun down to a stop. He looked at me and said, "Grandpa, they are fighting all the time. Dad is always on the phone yelling at people about money. Mom is packing up boxes of your stuff in our garage. They think I do not hear them. But I hear them. He looked down at his sneakers. His voice cracked a little. He said, "They are talking about putting you away." My chest tightened. The boy was 16 years old. He should be worrying about football games and asking girls to the movies. Instead, he was carrying the weight of his parents' crimes. I put the chisel down. I wiped my hands on a shop towel. I put a hand on his shoulder. I looked him right in the eyes. I dropped the confused old man routine completely. My voice was steady and hard. I told him, "Leo, listen to me very carefully. You are not responsible for what your parents do. You are a good kid. You have a good heart. Do not let their poison get into your blood." He looked up at me. He looked surprised to hear me speak so clearly. I told him, "Everything is going to change very soon. It is going to get ugly. But I promise you, on your grandmother's grave, you will be safe. I have got you." I had already instructed Sarah to rewrite the blind trust. I made Leo the sole beneficiary, not his mother, not his father, just the boy. When the dust settled, his college would be paid for. His future would be secure. He was the only piece of this family worth saving. March came around. The ground started to thaw. The mud in my driveway turned soft. I checked the encrypted laptop late on a Tuesday night. Another wire transfer had gone through. This time, it was massive. $120,000 routed straight to the Delaware Shell Company. Marcus was getting desperate. His offshore creditors were probably breathing down his neck. He was pulling everything he could grab before the walls closed in. I pulled out my notebook. I did the math. I added up the columns. 75, 40, 80, 100, 120. The grand total sat at the bottom of the screen. $515,000. They crossed the line. They stepped over the tripwire. It was no longer a family dispute. It was no longer a local theft. It was a massive, federal interstate wire fraud. They had bought themselves a mandatory minimum sentence. 10 years in federal prison. No early release. No parole. I closed the laptop. The pig was fat enough. The invisible noose was tight around their necks. Now all I had to do was kick the chair out from under them. 2 days later, I was sitting on my front porch. I had a cup of black coffee in my hand. Marcus's black luxury car pulled into my driveway. The tires spun a little in the mud. Jessica got out. She walked up the wooden steps to the porch. She was wearing a sharp gray suit. She looked like a woman who had already won the lottery and was just waiting to cash the ticket. She did not say hello. She did not ask how I was feeling. She reached into her designer leather bag and pulled out a thick stack of legal papers. She dropped them on the small wooden table next to my coffee cup. I looked at the papers. The top sheet had the seal of the state probate court. It was a formal summons. She looked down at me. She had a cold, triumphant smirk on her face. She said, "Dad, the court date is next Friday. The judge is going to evaluate your mental capacity. I have a doctor coming to testify that you are no longer fit to live alone. It is time to let go. I am taking over the estate. Everything is going to be in my name by next week." She leaned in a little closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper. She said, "Do not fight it. It will just be embarrassing for you. Pack a bag. Paingrove Estate has a room waiting for you." She expected me to cry. She expected me to beg. She expected the confused old man to panic and start shouting. I did not do any of those things. I took a slow sip of my black coffee. The heat felt good in my chest. I looked up at my daughter. I let the veil drop. I let her see the sharp, calculating engineer sitting in the chair. I let her see the man who built the very ground she was standing on. I smiled. It was the first time I had smiled in almost a year. I said, "Okay, sweetheart, I will see you in court." Friday morning came with a hard frost. I woke up at 5. I made a pot of black coffee. I went to my closet and pulled out a dark gray suit. I bought it 15 years ago, but it still fits perfectly. I tied a dark blue tie. I polished my black leather shoes until they shined. I did not look like a confused old man. I looked like a man going to work. I drove my truck to the county courthouse. It is a heavy stone building in the center of town. I walked up the concrete steps. I passed through the metal detectors. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor and walked into courtroom number 4. Jessica was already there. She did not come alone. She had brought an audience. My sister-in-law was sitting in the 2nd row. A couple of my cousins were there. Even some people from my old neighborhood. Jessica had invited them to watch the show. She wanted witnesses. She wanted everyone to see the old man put out to pasture, so nobody would ask questions later when she sold my house. She was wearing a conservative black dress. She had her hair pulled back. She looked like a grieving daughter making a tragic decision. Marcus was sitting next to her. He wore a custom navy suit and a silver watch. He looked at his phone, completely bored. To him, this was just a real estate transaction. I walked down the center aisle. I did not sit with them. I walked to the defense table and sat down alone. I placed my heavy brown leather briefcase on the wood table. The bailiff called the room to order. Judge Morrison walked in. She was an older woman with sharp eyes and a hard mouth. She sat behind the high wooden bench and opened the file. The hearing started. Jessica's lawyer called her to the stand. She gave a masterful performance. She cried at exactly the right moments. She kept dabbing her eyes with a white tissue. She told the judge how much she loved me. She said my mind was fading fast. She said I was leaving the stove on, wandering around the neighborhood, and forgetting the names of my own family members. Then her lawyer submitted the medical evaluation. The paperwork signed by the doctor she had bribed. The document that declared me legally incompetent. Judge Morrison read the paperwork. She looked down at me. Her face softened a little. Pity. That is what Jessica was counting on. Pity is a weapon used to disarm you before the kill. The judge asked me if I had legal counsel. I stood up. I said no, Your Honor. I am representing myself. The judge frowned. She said, Mr. Vance, the petition before me is very serious. Your daughter is asking to take over your finances, your property, and your medical decisions. Are you sure you do not want a court-appointed attorney? I stood completely straight. I buttoned my suit jacket. I looked at the relatives in the gallery. Then I looked at Jessica. Her fake tears stopped. She saw something in my posture. She saw the iron in my spine. I looked back at the judge. I said, I do not need a lawyer, Your Honor, because I am not confused. I am not sick. I am just very patient. I reached down and opened the brass latches on my leather briefcase. I pulled out the first thick folder. I handed it to the court bailiff, who carried it up to the judge. I said, Your Honor, my daughter claims I cannot manage my money. She is right that my bank accounts are entirely empty. But it is not because I forgot how to use them. It is because the man sitting in the front row, Marcus Cole, stole $515,000 from me over the last 6 months. The courtroom went completely dead. You could hear the hum of the air vents. Marcus jumped out of his seat. His face flushed red. He pointed at me and yelled that I was a crazy old liar. Judge Morrison banged her wooden gavel hard. She told Marcus to sit down and keep his mouth shut, or she would have him thrown in a holding cell. Marcus slowly sat down. The blood drained out of his face. I kept my voice calm and steady. I said, the folder in your hands contains official bank logs. It shows 32 separate wire transfers. It also contains the IP address trace for every single transaction. Those traces prove that the money was moved using my desktop computer, but authorized from a device matching Marcus Cole's mobile phone MAC address. The funds were sent to a corporate shell company in Delaware called Apex Consulting, a company registered under his name. Judge Morrison flipped through the pages. Her eyes moved fast. She looked at the bank stamps. She looked at the signature of the bank manager, Sarah Jenkins, certifying the records. The judge looked up. The pity in her eyes was completely gone. She looked at Marcus like he was a cockroach on her desk. Jessica stood up. She was panicking. Her voice was shaking, but not from fake tears. It was real fear. She said, Your Honor, my father is paranoid. He prints things off the internet. He does not know what he is talking about. We submitted a medical evaluation from a licensed doctor. He belongs in a facility. I did not even look at her. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the second folder. I handed it to the bailiff. I said, the medical evaluation is a fraud. It was bought and paid for. The bailiff handed the folder to the judge. I said, that folder contains a copy of a cleared check for $5,000. It was written from Jessica Cole's personal checking account to the doctor, who signed that evaluation. The check cleared 3 days before the doctor signed the paper. A doctor who has never examined me in person. A doctor who currently has 2 pending state board investigations for fraudulent diagnosis. I heard a sharp gasp from the gallery. I glanced back. My sister-in-law had her hands covering her mouth. The relatives who came to watch me fall were suddenly watching a firing squad. I pulled one more piece of paper from the folder. I held it up. I said, and this is an admission form for Pennygrove Estate. My daughter filled it out weeks ago. Pennygrove is a facility currently under state investigation for using heavy chemical sedatives to keep elderly patients quiet. She planned to lock me in a chemical prison, drug me out of my mind, and sell my home to pay off her husband's gambling debts. Judge Morrison stared at the $5,000 check. Her face was turning pale with anger. Jessica realized the walls were closing in. She went for her last desperate trick. She dug into her designer purse and pulled out a folded piece of heavy paper. She waved it in the air. She yelled, I have a durable power of attorney. He signed it 2 years ago. I am his legal proxy. I have the right to move his money and manage his property. We did nothing wrong. It is completely legal. She was breathing heavy. She thought she had a shield. She thought the law would protect her. I looked at her. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I said, that piece of paper is worthless, Jessica. Because there is nothing left for you to manage. I reached into my briefcase one last time. I pulled out a heavy stack of legal paper, wrapped in a red ribbon seal. I handed it to the bailiff. I said, you thought you were going to sell my house today. But while you were stealing my cash, I opened an independent blind trust. I used the money your mother left me. And I went to the bank that holds the mortgage on your stucco mansion. Marcus let out a sound. It was like a dog getting kicked in the stomach. He knew. He instantly knew what I had done. I looked right at Marcus. I said, you missed 3 mortgage payments. The bank classified your loan as bad debt. They sold the note at a heavy discount to my trust. I own it now. I own the roof over your head. I own the driveway you park your leased car on. I own the grass in your front yard. I turned back to the judge. I said, Your Honor, that document includes a formal 30-day notice of foreclosure and immediate eviction. They came here today to take my keys. But I am here to take theirs. They are out on the street. Jessica started screaming. She lost her mind. She yelled that I was a monster. She yelled that she would sue me for everything I had. She grabbed Marcus by the arm and told him to do something. Marcus just sat there, staring at the floor, completely paralyzed. I looked at my watch. It was 10:30 in the morning. Right on time. I looked at my screaming daughter. I said, You can try to sue me, Jessica. But you are going to be a little busy. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. They hit the doorstops with a loud crash. Tom Harrison walked in. He was wearing a sharp gray suit and a dark wool topcoat. He walked with the heavy, solid steps of a man who owned the ground he stood on. Behind him were 2 federal marshals in dark suits. Behind them were 3 agents wearing navy blue windbreakers with the letters FBI printed in bright yellow on the back. The courtroom went dead silent again. The only sound was the heavy boots of the federal agents walking down the center aisle. Judge Morrison stood up. She asked what was going on in her courtroom. Tom walked right past the gallery. He handed his federal identification badge and a thick warrant jacket to the bailiff. Tom looked at the judge. He spoke in a voice that rumbled like a freight train. He said, Your Honor, my name is Thomas Harrison. I am acting as special counsel for the United States Attorney's Office. We are here to execute a federal arrest warrant for Jessica Cole and Marcus Cole. Jessica froze. Her mouth was still open, but no sound came out. Marcus backed away from the aisle, bumping hard into the wooden railing. Tom turned his body and looked directly at them. He said, Grand theft at the state level is a local problem. But when you use a computer to move stolen funds across state lines, and when that stolen amount crosses $500,000, you trigger the federal wire fraud statute. Tom pointed a thick finger at Marcus. He said, $515,000. You crossed the federal threshold last Tuesday. You bought yourselves a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years in a federal penitentiary. There is no early release. There is no parole. Tom nodded to the agents. The federal marshals moved in. They grabbed Marcus first. They spun him around and slammed him face first against the wooden railing. He did not fight. He just collapsed against the wood. The sound of heavy steel handcuffs clicking shut echoed off the high ceiling. It was the loudest sound in the room. The second the steel locked around his wrists, Marcus started crying. He did not try to be a man. He pointed his cuffed hands at Jessica. He screamed that it was her idea. He yelled that she made him do it. He told the federal agents she planned the whole thing. He threw his own wife under the bus before they even read him his Miranda rights. A female FBI agent grabbed Jessica by the arms. She pulled them firmly behind her back. Jessica tried to pull away. She twisted and kicked her expensive shoes against the floor. The agent did not hesitate. She shoved Jessica face down onto the defense table, right next to my briefcase, and locked the iron cuffs around her wrists. The gallery was in shock. The neighbors and cousins who came to watch me get put away were staring in absolute terror. No one made a sound. Jessica was crying. Real tears this time. Her expensive makeup was smeared across her cheeks and the polished wood of the table. She twisted her head and looked up at me. She did not look like an arrogant predator anymore. She looked like a terrified, broken child. She screamed at me. She yelled, Dad, Dad, please tell them to stop. Please help me. You are my father. You have to help me. I stood there in my dark gray suit. I looked down at the documents on the table. I stacked them neatly. I placed them inside my brown leather briefcase. I closed the lid and fastened the brass latches. I picked up the briefcase by the handle. I looked down at the woman bleeding black mascara onto the table. I felt no anger. I felt no pity. I just felt a quiet, absolute emptiness. I said, My daughter died 3 years ago when her mother passed away. I do not know who you are. I turned my back on her. I walked down the center aisle. I walked past Marcus, who was sobbing against the railing. I walked past the shocked faces of my relatives. I walked past Tom, who gave me a slow, respectful nod. I pushed the heavy wooden doors open. I walked out of the courtroom, down the concrete steps, and out into the cold, clean air of the morning. 6 months went by. The weather turned warm, then cooled off again as autumn rolled into the valley. I am sitting on the back porch of a cabin overlooking Lake Miller. The wind coming off the water smells like pine needles and damp earth. It is quiet out here. The kind of quiet that lets a man finally hear his own thoughts. The federal justice system does not move fast, but it moves heavy. The trial did not take long at all. Marcus tried to cut a deal by testifying against Jessica. Jessica tried to blame her doctor, the stock market, and me. The federal judge did not care. Wire fraud across state lines, elder financial abuse, and criminal conspiracy. The hammer came down hard. 12 years in a federal penitentiary. Both of them. No early release for good behavior. No parole. They will be in their late 50s by the time they see the outside of a concrete wall. The government seized their cars, their accounts, and the stucco house I foreclosed on. The debt was wiped clean. The money they stole was fully returned to my trust. I did not keep my old house. I thought I would die in that house. I built it for Martha. I built it for our family. But the walls held too many memories of a daughter who stopped being my daughter. The day the trial ended, I called a real estate agent. I sold it to a nice young couple expecting their first baby. They needed a good solid foundation. I packed up Martha's photos, my clothes, and my tools. I left the rest. I drove past the old property one last time before I handed over the keys. I sat in my truck and looked at the roof I framed and the driveway I poured. A man leaves a piece of his soul in the things he builds. But a house is just wood, nails, and concrete. I put the truck in gear and drove away. I did not look in the rearview mirror. I bought this cabin up by the lake, just 2 miles down the dirt road from Tom Harrison. Tom comes over every Sunday. We sit on the porch, pour 2 glasses of bourbon, and do not talk about courts or federal prisons. We talk about boat engines and weather patterns. That is the thing about good men. When the hard work is done, you do not need to brag about it. You just go back to living. Sarah Jenkins is doing fine too. The bank promoted her to regional director 3 months ago. She took a risk to help an old friend, and she came out on top. She earned every bit of it. But I did not move up to the lake alone. When the marshals took Marcus and Jessica away, the state had to figure out what to do with Leo. He was 16. He had nobody else. I stepped in that same afternoon with my lawyer. I took emergency custody. Now it is just the 2 of us. The first few months were rough on the boy. He barely spoke. He walked around with his head down, carrying the heavy shame of what his parents did. He thought people looked at him and saw a thief. He thought he was made of bad materials. I did not push him to talk. You cannot force a kid to open up when he is hurting. You just have to give him a job to do, and stand beside him while he does it. This morning, we were out in the shed. I had an old cast iron wood plane on the workbench. The blade was dull and the handles were covered in decades of grime. I handed Leo a piece of heavy grit sandpaper and a tin of machine oil. I told him to clean it up. We stood there side by side for an hour. Just the sound of grit scraping against metal. Leo stopped and wiped his forehead. He looked at the heavy iron tool. He asked me if it was really worth saving. He said it looked like it was too far gone. I picked up the plane. I ran my thumb over the rough steel edge. I told him that just because something has rust on it does not mean the iron underneath is bad. You just have to be willing to do the hard work of scraping away the rot. Once you get rid of the dead layers, you find the solid metal. You sharpen the edge, and it cuts just as good as the day it was made. Leo looked at me. I think he knew we were not talking about the tool. He gave me a small nod, picked up the sandpaper, and went back to work. Later, I gave him a rough piece of red cedar. He clamped it into the heavy iron vise. I showed him how to set the blade depth on the plane. Not too deep, or it bites into the wood and gets stuck. Just a thin shaving. I told him to use his shoulders, not just his arms, and push through the whole length of the board. He took his first pass. A thin, curling strip of cedar peeled off the top. The smell of the fresh wood filled the shed. He smiled. It was a small smile, but it was the first real one I had seen on his face since the day his parents were taken away. A man works his whole life to build something that lasts. You put money in the bank. You put a roof over your family. You think that is enough. But the real legacy is not the cash. And it is not the real estate. It is the line you draw in the sand. When a branch on a tree turns black and starts pulling disease down into the trunk, you do not sit there and cry about the branch. You do not let the whole tree die just because you planted it. You take a saw. You cut it off cleanly. You let the dead wood fall to the ground. That is the only way the tree survives. I am 72 years old. My bank account is full. My grandson is safe. My dignity is intact. Nobody is ever going to put a tracker on my wrist or lock me in a chemical ward. I am a free man sitting on my own porch, drinking my own coffee. And when the sun comes up tomorrow, Leo and I are going to take the boat out on the lake and see if the fish are biting. If you know what it means to stand your ground and protect what belongs to you, hit the subscribe button. Stick around. There are a lot more stories out there about people who thought they could take advantage of the quiet guy in the room, and the hard lessons they had to learn.